What is going on, y'all? KMBest here. Hot takes time once again, and we are starting off with a banger. We want more broken cards week to week. These lackluster releases aren't moving the meta quick enough. Bring back Arishem level of dominance. I think one of the through lines in the conversation we're about to have, and the conversation that will stretch over multiple hot takes and generally across this whole episode, and maybe it's a conversation that everyone has been having sort of subconsciously, is about the ways in which the current system of releases creates weird incentives for both the player base and for the developers. And what I mean by that is when they release a card and it is strong, that is generally going to be better for them and for you than releasing a card that is weak. And that is because it feels like something happened. Marvel Snap has a relative lack of content updates. There are really only a few places where content is added to the game. It is a constant drip feed, but it's not like something is dramatically changing. In other games, similar to Marvel Snap, you will see longer periods between something being added and a big amount of stuff being added at once. This creates an impression of a vastly different meta, if not even creating a vastly different meta whenever new cards come out. Asking one card to carry the weight of an expansion is a recipe for power creep. It is a way in which you can justify pushing the numbers and the abilities of new cards coming out and saying, okay, look, we have to do this because if we don't, it's like we didn't make the card at all. And I think that that is a correct assessment of the situation. What I'm interested in is the amount of people who are convinced that they would like the broken card, because I feel like, to me, the last few months, by like literally 2 months is what I'm going to say, like the Agamotto month and this month, have been fairly restrained in terms of power level and leaning into other avenues of appeal, hooking into decks you like, or creating new and weird archetypes. Cards like Agamotto and Infinity Ultron are not broken, but they are very appealing. Obviously, Agamotto is a little bit, maybe a lot, stronger. Cards like Goliath and Captain Carter are not amazing, but they fit with things. And I think that that might be a long-term healthier approach. The issue is, in the short term, while we're still under this one card a week, no snap packs, no going and getting whatever, no novelty, the weight that every card has to carry is just too high. Not only does it have to be a compelling and powerful card that nothing is similar to in the game in a meaningful way, because they can't just go and make, Angela and sell it to you for 6,000 tokens. They can't do that, right? So it has to be outside of the space they've explored or explicitly better than the space they've explored. And then it also has to be in 1 week, less than 1 week, really. I would bet most of their sales are in the first 2 days, immediately apparent that it's strong. And I think that's a harder restriction than actually making a strong card. Because there have been plenty of cards that people were like, I don't know how good this is, and then 4 weeks later, it ends up pretty clearly actually good. But it took a while, it's a sleeper, and they're not allowed to make sleepers, because no one can go back and get the sleepers. And I think that's one thing that Snap Packs could legitimately alleviate, is that not only do these cards have so much weight on them in terms of, we need these cards to be strong so that it feels like something changed in the game, but also we need them to be strong immediately. We need it to be clear when you read the card that it is strong. And I think that's a much harder thing to accomplish than just making a strong card. I think they can make plenty of strong cards without them reading strong, but they're not allowed to do that because of the way in which Snap Packs work, or because of the way the current system works. Even Sam Wilson was initially underrated on release. This is a card that came out and people were like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. I remember I called it an 8 out of 10. Within 2 weeks, I was saying it was the best card in the game. But that took 2 weeks. If it takes 2 weeks for a card that is Series 5 to become the best card in the game, you have a whole week where you can't get it already. And that is, I think, the ultimate problem that this is diving into. Like, we want more broken cards, yes. We want our cards to feel like they matter, yes. But whenever they do them, they also have to be immediately broken, or we won't be able to know that they're broken and go get them, and everyone hated what happened with Hydra Bob. Generically good cards like Gwenpool, Galacta, Sam Wilson, etc. are usually overplayed and are more just generic includes than the actual best option in a deck with tight deck building. They do have their place, and there are some historical exceptions. Yeah, I can't type anymore. This is a great take. It is, in my opinion, the idea of generic includes like that is more reflective of Snap's competitive environment than it is of the actual specific power level of those cards. They are generally overplayed, especially Gwenpool, I think, who probably is not nearly as generic. This is part of why I feel the way I do about Kahori, where it's like, you play Gwenpool when Gwenpool would be better than Kahori. You play Kahori when Kahori would be better than Gwenpool. And there are certain scenarios in which both of those things are true. Galacta, I think at 4-6 really was pushing this. I think that Sam Wilson currently really is pushing this. But I will say that I think a lot of this stems from the fact that Marvel Snap doesn't have real rewards for innovating. Let's say you spend 100 games just trying to find a deck that beats all the stuff. You play 10 decks for 10 games, and 9 of them are terrible, and the 10th one is actually pretty good. It might not be the best deck in the game, but it's pretty good. You probably lost a lot of SP and ranks doing that. And it's because of this, because of the fact that we don't have an environment that is set up to reward innovation. Ladders are set up to reward people like me, who can see a metagame in a wide scope and tune good decks to beat that metagame. They're not set up to reward people who are playing surprise stuff, because surprise loses value the first time you play it. This is the surprise stuff is much more valuable when the first time you play someone is going to be the last time you play someone, like in a knockout tournament setting. That is where innovation can thrive. That is where this kind of stuff matters. What is interesting to me is I don't know if that's better, or if it's more skill testing, or any of that, but I do know that the current way the ladder is set up versus, say, tournaments does enforce a metagame in a much stricter way, because there are no real rewards for going outside of that. The reward for going outside of that is, I play you once, I'm like, oh, that's cool, I try to get a copy of the deck list, I probably end up getting a copy of the deck list, there's only 12 cards in it, it's not that hard. And then suddenly everyone knows it, and there's no real surprise anymore within a week. There's just not enough justification for, tanking your rank or just messing around as much when you could just be ruthlessly putting on the blinders and going to town playing something that is legitimately just good. And so I think that there is a lot of that in Marvel Snap's competitive environment that is worth talking about. And I think that Woody's a great example of someone who succeeds through innovation, but also succeeds in making innovation look better than it is because he's cracked. I am no whale. I buy season passes and gold passes, and that's it. I used to spend that much on WoW. I am no hardcore. I rarely even make infinite. What I am is someone who plays every day, picks up all the freebies, makes progress on missions, bounties when I remember to, and completes events. On 4/29, I will own every card in the game, with 50k tokens to spare. I am Joe Snap Player, and I have won the game. This is honestly, it's kind of nice to read this. It's nice to see that, that kind of thing can still happen. I do think that there is sort of a balance that Marvel Snap has to strike between giving you free stuff for playing the game and still trying to get you to spend money. I hear a shocking amount of criticism from free-to-play players that it's like, well, I can't get any variants or, things of that nature. And that's always just sort of shocking to me, because I look at that and I think, how greedy are you, right? It's the kind of thing that I get critiqued on a lot, where people are like, why aren't you talking about spotlight variants when you're talking about card acquisition? Why aren't you talking about the price of cosmetics? And it's like, because I don't care about that. I care about people being able to play the game. And it is interesting to note the other ways in which people interact with Marvel Snap. This is kind of, I view, the platonic ideal of how good a game, of how a game should be. If this is possible over some amount of time, that's really good. I do think my worry is that the amount of time it takes for this to be possible is pretty high. And, at least under the current system, there's going to be a large gulf between, a period of time wherein you don't have any good decks and you're playing against people with good decks. And I think that's ultimately the period of time that I want to cut short as possible, which I do think Snap Packs does, in the sense of, oh, I don't have any good decks, I can go out and get one much quicker thanks to targeted acquisition. There is no longer a massive gap where I am at the mercy of whatever's in the spotlights, basically. I do think that is a meaningful step towards reducing that gap. And as long as that gap gets smaller and smaller, and people who are lower on the collection track can build at least one deck that can compete with a full collection level player, which, like, maybe they can build the ongoing anti-venom deck, maybe they can build something along those lines, a reasonable facsimile of a Thanos deck or something, like just something that's pretty good within, say, I don't know, 4 Series 5 cards is sort of where I'm at. Maybe it's the V-Hand Misery deck. I haven't really taken a look, but I do think it's probably possible that this is a thing that can happen. And so, like, let's say you get it within 4 Series 5 cards. That means that you start collecting tokens around CL 500, 4 Series 5 cards around CL 1000, basically. I think that's probably fine. I think it's probably fine if the gap lasts from like CL 500 to CL 1000 if you're smart about it. That's, that's whatever. I'm cool with that. Except it wouldn't be, because it'd actually be between CL 500 and like CL, I want to say 13 or 1400. Because you get, right now, it's like you get 3,000 tokens per about 128 collector's levels, give or take. You get some other tokens, probably. It's probably a little more generous than this. But that's about 900 collector's levels to get the 24,000 tokens or whatever. So CL 500 on up. I don't know. That's where it starts to get a little bit iffy to me. Like, I want that gap to be as small as possible. Maybe they can do like a gift of a Series 5 card when you hit CL 500 or something like that. Things like that are like, I really think that stretch of time where you have to play against, like, there's no kiddie pool in Marvel Snap. You can't just like be like, oh, I'll go farm up my stuff and not risk my rank. There's no option for that. And so you have to go actually, play the game against the people with the good decks for an extended period of time with your rank on the line. And I think that specific situation is where that is most harmful. And the smaller that gap between like 500 and whenever you can get a real deck is, the happier I am going to be with the game's experience. The Hood is the best one-drop in the game. His on-reveal is easily exploited while providing you a more consistent floor than something like Nico, who can win games you have no business winning but relies on RNG. It seems to me like the Hood has been in many best decks for a while now. I think this is basically objectively true. I have no quarrels with this task. I've been watching a lot of Taskmaster recently. I have no quarrels with this take. I should name this show Take Master. We might have to do another take of this. We'll see if I leave this in the edit. But yeah, this is a genuinely great take. I think it's absolutely correct. And more than that, I think the Hood actively restricts design space in that his on reveal is so good and what he's asking you to do is so clear. Double me or get rid of me. And there are cards that do both of those things. And I think that is a really unique position for a one drop to be in. And I don't really know if they can ever make another one of him, because if they do, then every time like doesn't that just make the Misery deck super messed up? Isn't that like a real invitation for Misery Firehair to be a thing? Is that a good thing? Do we want that? And so, yeah, it's a little bit of an odd spot, in my opinion, for the Hood to exist in. I would not actually, like, I'd be surprised if they nerfed him, because I doubt his numbers ever justify it. But sometimes they'll do stuff just to, like, change things up a little bit. I kind of think the Hood and Zabu are, like, on that list of cards that have been good for a really damn long time. Snap is too slow in creating new archetypes. Some examples include not having enough cards for a merge deck, no real activate deck, and the front and back lane mechanic. We only have one available card for front and back. Even with packs, this may not change soon. We talked about the consequences of the release system they've chosen, and I think that this is definitely one of them. When you look at the idea that a card is a premium object a lot of the time, and it's hard to sort of parse how much a card actually costs in Marvel Snap, because everything is acquirable free to play, right? Like, this is a game in which you can choose not to engage in spending money at all. And so it seems a little disingenuous to be like, a card is $75 because that's how much 6,000 tokens is in dollars, because it ignores the fact that you can actually spend $0 on it. But regardless, I think it's fair to say that a card in Marvel Snap is more expensive than a card in another game. And I think well, not all cards in another game, but like probably the average, right? And I think that causes problems when it comes to making a mechanic the focus of the season. Because let's say you want to make a mechanic the focus of the season. Let's say you're designing a season and you want all of the cards, like you're going to release 4 Series 5 cards and a Season Pass card, and you want all of them to use the same mechanic. We're going to say that mechanic is like a mechanic that gets better with the other cards. So like let's say it does like, we're going to use a magic mechanic here. It's like bolster 1. And then when you play the second one, it goes to like bolster 2. And you play the third one, it goes to like bolster 3. And they're like jade golems, basically. Let's say we're doing jade golems, right? You can't really do that in Snap without saying that the best deck, which, jade golems, like any mechanic that scales off of like having a bunch of cards that do the same thing, right? If you do that in Snap, people have to buy all of them. They have to buy the Season Pass, and they have to buy every card in the season. That means, in turn, that if they don't buy one, they're not going to buy the others. It makes the cards less appealing as standalone objects. And we talked earlier about how these cards need to be immediately appealing standalone objects. I guess in theory, you could try to thread the needle and be like, I'm going to make some immediately appealing standalone objects, but if you make immediately appealing standalone objects, I guarantee you the deck that runs all 5 of them is going to be broken, right? And so you kind of can't do that either. And so you end up with a situation where cards need to stand on their own to be worth being in a spotlight cache on their own, because if they aren't like that, you're sacrificing the ability for people to actually even play the deck that they're in. Because not everybody has $10 and 24,000 tokens lying around to go buy the 5 new cards that you basically said you can't play without the other 4 of these. That's, I think, the problem that this runs into. Is like, I do agree they've been too slow in making these decks be a real thing, but I think that is a restriction that is imposed on them by the way in which the mechanic works. Say what you want about Pokemon Pocket, and there's plenty to say. They are very willing to do extreme mechanics. They did a whole set, the Arceus set, I don't know how to pronounce that name, with a very parasitic mechanic, which is nuts. Like, there's a bunch of cards in there that just straight up do not work if you do not have an Arceus. And it's just like, whoa, okay, you just did that. That is, to me, like a very crazy design decision. Like, that is, I saw that and I was like, I genuinely cannot believe they're doing that. But it doesn't seem to have been all that negative. I don't really know. I guess we'd have to look at like metrics or something of that nature. But like, that is sort of the exact thing that Marvel Snap, by its release system, is even more unable to do. And I thought it was pretty crazy to do in Pokemon Pocket in the first place. Marvel Snap is so totally unable to do that. When you look at like the things that you're suggesting, like merge and activate, right? Those are mechanics that scale off of volume. And so if you have 4 merge cards and you're missing like the 5th one, you probably can't play the merge deck because you're missing the 5th one and you need the volume of them. And I think a lot of the same stuff applies to activate, where it's like, let's say they like make an activate build around. I don't know exactly what you should be doing with that or how it would work, because you'd need the activate cards, which are also unfortunately expensive. And so like, how are you going to sell some card that's like, I scale off activates to people that don't own Scarlet Spider or whatever? How are you going to sell that? And it just puts them in an incredibly awkward position where they're very unable to make parasitic mechanics that go beyond like 1 card, right? They can make Doom 2099 because Doom is Series 3. They can make High Evolutionary because all those cards are starter cards. But they can't really do that for anything else. And it's a very awkward position for them to be put in. I know many people have and will argue the opposite, but IMO Second Dinner has nailed the balance of new cards over recent months. Playable and not busted is healthy for Snap. IMO, the actual balance issue is when the OTAs feel inconsequential, and cards like Valkyrie and Supergiant are left to rot. I'm gonna start at the end here. I think picking out Valkyrie and Supergiant as cards that are left to rot is like kind of insane, because I personally cannot figure out how to buff those cards without making them incredibly annoying and very, very strong. Those are cards where it's like, I don't want to touch them because the risk is very, very high. And I know you're like, oh, I can't believe Second Dinner won't touch them. Dude, I wouldn't touch them. The risk on those cards being good is so high. Those are cards where it's like, if you put Valkyrie to 4, suddenly people can Zabu it. Suddenly they're running 2 Shang-Chis. Horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. And what else can you do? What are you supposed to make her a 5/4? Because then she sets everything to 3 and that counts herself. So unless you say this always wins a full lane, I don't know what you're supposed to do with her. And that's a pretty risky thing too. Super Giant, super risky. Already a card that I think is like a little underrated, making it meaningfully stronger and reminding people this play pattern exists. I would highly doubt that that would be a good thing. I strongly suspect if that card is ever good, people will complain about it to no end. And I know people are going to say, oh, they complain about everything, but like, no, that's actually a problem. I think that one is like a genuinely complaint-worthy play pattern if it ends up being legitimately strong. So examples there are notable, but also not the main point that this person is making. But I think the 2 points are related. I think that the reason people feel like OTAs need to carry the balance weight is because cards haven't been. And I also think that when the metagame is good, the fact is that people don't care. People don't care if we have a good balanced metagame with a lot of decks that are viable and are about like 50-something% win rate and they're all like pretty good. People don't care about that. What people care about is novelty. And I think that when people are asking for a bigger swing on OTAs, what they're saying is we haven't had enough novelty from card releases. That's what they're saying. And I think that's reasonable, but that ties back into the power level of card releases and sort of the thesis of this episode, which is at least when they make broken cards, you notice. And when they don't make broken cards, they all just sort of fade away, and it's kind of like they didn't make a card at all. And I think in a world where they aren't making a lot of cards in that sense, it's easy to look at OTAs and say you need to be carrying the slack, but I don't think they do. I think it might be something beyond both card releases and OTAs. Gambit is the most frustrating card at Snap. Never once has anyone been hit by Gambit and said GG well played. It's just RNG. With cards like Swarm, Proxima, Scorn, and Khonshu, there's no gambling involved. Well, there's plenty of gambling involved in praying your Gambit hits the right thing, I can tell you that. But what I will say is, I think card games need some amount of blind RNG in order to be fun. I think Gambit games, even though they suck when you lose them, are high-octane, good experiences in the sense of, like, you really feel something. I don't know about you, but as a card gamer who sees a lot of things in the context of odds and, you know, generally dispassionate kind of interaction with the world, I'm a little bit dead inside. But you know what makes me feel something is when Gambit slaps down on my opponent's side of the field, the side of the board, and my butthole puckers up like the world's tiniest bagel. That's card gaming. The ceiling for new cards is being hidden behind investment into their strategy to the point that it's not worth it. Too many of the new cards need another new card to be viable. I don't think it's necessarily they need another new card, but I do agree that they've been experimenting with cards that desire more from you deck building wise. And I cannot help but wonder if this is maybe a little bit of a reaction to having made so many Sam Wilsons, Galactos, things like that. They're like, what if we tried something else? What if we tried to make cards that are appealing based on their appeal? What if we just like made cards that are unique and fun and nice and good? And I think it's very hard to hit good and not too good. I don't even know what card I would describe as good and not too good. Sarah, maybe? I think that's a pretty reasonable example where it's just like what would a good power level for everything be? Is Sarah. I think if they can just make a million Sarahs, that's probably really good in the long term. The problem is that like for every Sarah power level card you make, the more normal that becomes. And then suddenly when you hit below that, it looks terrible. And when you hit above that, it makes all the Sarahs you made look terrible. It's just sort of a fundamental problem with card games that there's only really a few options for making cards. You're either going to power creep or you have to get some of the biggest power offenders out of the game so other cards can actually have time to shine. I don't think it should be lost on people that many people have been complaining about the low power level of new releases in a world where we have had access to Sam Wilson and Scream the entire time. There's a reason those decks, Sam Wilson, Scream, Bullseye, have been here the entire time we've had sort of quote unquote lackluster new releases. Are these new releases lackluster? Or are they just lackluster compared to that? And I think that that is the thing that really sticks out to me, where it's just like, it's very hard, and I think we're seeing what's happening and why it's so hard to release, to like dial back power creep without like explicitly doing it, right? Like let's say there's even like an attempt to do that, which honestly I don't know. Maybe it's just sort of how things worked out. But like even if you're attempting to do that, like isn't it a little bit hard to release non-power creeped cards and then say go out there and compete with Sam Wilson? I think that's pretty hard. It's hard to release a Sarah and say go out there and be better than Sam Wilson. Go out there and justify being worth purchasing and be better than Sam Wilson. I think that's very difficult. And I think that that is a real problem that the metagame is facing. It's kind of why I think that people are feeling this sort of like, why aren't the OTAs doing something? I think it's just a byword for like, can we just get rid of this like same 3 decks that have been, you know, within the top 8 decks in the game since January? Can we just get rid of that? And I think that's sort of like the undertone of a lot of these critiques about like lackluster card releases or OTAs not doing enough. I think what people are really saying is like, not necessarily the cards are bad, but they're bad in the context they're coming out in. So you need to change that context, please. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for making it through this episode. As always, I have been KMBest. Your takes have been hot, and you have been phenomenal. I will see you in the next one.